It's just preparing. Okay, thank you, Chairman. I can confirm that we are streaming live on YouTube now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this meeting. Also including members of the public and press viewing the meeting via the live stream on YouTube. I am Councillor Stan Avison and I am Chairman of the Licensing Committee. This is a remote meeting under the new government legislation, and the role of the committee is to decide what action to take, if any, at this particular meeting. There are 3 councillors on the committee, plus 1 councillor observing. We also have a number of officers present that will be presenting reports, taking the minutes, and administrating the video conference, and providing legal services as well. Just to remind everyone, this is really important advice. The audio becomes less clear if you don't have your mute on unless you are speaking, please. So that would be great. That would be grateful. Make sure you've got your video turned on. And when they want to speak, press the blue hand button on the participant list, and that you will then be in order of speaking. Thank you. If you need to leave the meeting, please let me know before you leave. Otherwise, I won't know if you are meant to leave the meeting or have left due to connectivity issues. Thank you. I will just go through now the first of all, the election of chairman. Do I have a proposer and a seconder, please?
Yeah, Mr. Councillor Everson, I'd like to propose you as chairman, please.
Thank you, Councillor Leonard.
Yeah, could I second you as chairman, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Butts. Now, if we could invite our other people into the meeting, please, Anne.
Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, Mr. Councillor Everson, I'd like to propose you as chairman, please.
Thank you, Councillor. Have we got everyone in now, Anne?
Yes, Chairman, everyone in the waiting room has now joined the meeting. Thank you.
Good morning to you all. Let's just come into the meeting. I'm Councillor Stan Avison and I am chairing this meeting this morning. I also have Councillor Leonard and Councillor Billy Brooks with me. First of all, I'd ask us for a disclosure of interest, if any, please. No, thank you. Register of attendance.
I'll just do a roll call
to go through that, Joe, please.
Yeah, I'll just do a roll call of names. If you can just confirm, please, if you are present. Councillor Stan Avison.
Present.
Councillor Billy Brooks.
Present.
Councillor Andrew Leonard.
Councillor Leonard. Are you frozen out?
Oh, it looks as though we might have lost Councillor Leonard.
Councillor Leonard seems to be frozen out.
Oh, I'll just ask him to unmute, Chairman. I think we've lost him. Right. I don't know if we're going to have to pause until we can. I think Councillor Leonard's been disconnected, Chairman.
You just allow him a couple of seconds to reconnect,
Yes,
Chairman,
allow him
because
to
he did
yes,
connect quite easily the first time. So I suspect he'll just be a moment and then he'll be back in.
Yeah, he went off once before, didn't he?
Yeah.
Seems to be struggling.
Could I just ask, perhaps Adrian or Mr. Ken could confirm, we have a gentleman who's named as CX. Is that the applicant? Is that Mr. Ali?
Michael, are you able to answer that? It's Adrian.
Yeah, is that Mr. Ali Duncan? You're on mute.
I don't know if he's got his audio on. Have you got your audio on?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, it works. Yeah, I'm not sure what the username is on my thing. I'm not actually sure.
that's all right, but that is you, Mr. Ali. I'll just rename you for the benefit of the meeting. I just wanted to confirm that was you before we proceeded.
It's not my computer, so I'm not sure.
That doesn't matter. That doesn't matter as long as it's your face. Thank you very much.
Looks like Councillor Leonard has now joined the meeting, Chairman.
Oh, good. Oh, that's good.
Sorry, I
news.
lost the connection there.
Yes, I see. So yes, that's okay. You're back in present now, Council. That's fine. Thank you.
And can I just confirm if Councillor Newman is present as well, please?
Yes.
Yeah,
Just to make sure you're absolutely here, Councillor. Could you just?
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, we move on to item 4, which is an application for the review of a premises licence at the Agra Tandoori in Horncastle. First of all, if I could ask the Principal Licensing Officer, Mr. Adrian Twiddy, please, to run through the report.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So if it's okay with you, I'll just, obviously the people that have just joined the meeting, I'll just go through a few processes if that's okay. So I'm not sure how well versed everybody is in using Zoom, but if you just want to hover over one of the bottom towards the bottom bar, and on the left-hand side in the corner, there is a mute button. And I think everybody's probably found that already now. But what we tend to do is the person who's talking unmutes. And then when you're not talking, if you'll mute yourself, otherwise you can end up with a bit of a cacophony of noise as we go along. So just get used to using that mute and unmute button. I sometimes am guilty of forgetting to unmute, so just remember that it's there and you're muted. And if there's any point where you need to raise your hand, hopefully most of you have got the right-hand screen open, which is the participant screen, and on there's a raise hand button, and we tend to use that quite often in these meetings. So are you okay? Mr. Craig, are you okay with that?
I think everybody.
I think you're still muted, Mr. Craig.
Sorry, forgive me. I do apologise. We're all getting used to this new crazy world we're in. Well, I can see the participants. Whereabouts is the raised hand?
If you click,
I've got it.
That's
Found
it.
it. Sorry, apologies. Thank you.
It just makes it all easier for us as we go along.
Of course.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think probably I'll just explain Councillor Claire Newman's role at the meeting as well, just so everybody's aware of that. So there are 3 members of the subcommittee, which is Councillor Avison, Councillor Brooks and Councillor Andrew Leonard. What we do at East Lindsey, we always have what we call a substitute member or an observing member, something like that. It's a way of training and way of members getting to see the wide range of licensing subcommittees that take place. So Councillor Newman's observing today, Mr. Craig, but she won't get involved in the hearing itself. Is that
Thank you for
okay?
letting me know.
Yeah. And Councillor Avison, did you want everybody just to go round and before I do my report, just for everybody to explain who they are and what their roles are?
Yes, I was coming. Yes, if they would, Adrian, please. I appreciate so that I can recognise people as they come up on the screen.
Thank you. So I'll go first. I'm Adrian Twiddy. I'm the Principal Licensing Officer here at East Lindsey. And in a second, I'm just going to go through the report that the licensing team's written for the committee and for everybody involved in this process. So on my screen, the next one is Kim. Did you want to go?
Thank you. Kim Robertson, Legal Advisor to the committee.
And then Sergeant Enderby.
Good morning, I'm Sergeant Kim Enderby. I'm the Alcohol Licensing Manager for Lincolnshire Police.
And then Gina.
Good morning, I'm Gina McConville. I'm a Licensing Officer with Lincolnshire Police.
And John, did you want to go?
Yep, thanks Adrian. Good morning, I'm John Challen. I'm the Service Manager for Safer Communities at East Lindsey District Council.
And John's in observing today. John's observed quite a few of the hearings as we've gone along. Joe, do you want to do your bit?
Joanne Patterson, Democratic Services Officer, and I'll be taking the minutes at today's meeting. Thank you.
And then there's you as well, Anne.
Morning, everyone. I'm Anne Good from Democratic Services. I'm hosting the meeting today.
And Michael, did you and Duncan want to do your side of things with Mr. Ali?
Yeah, I'm Michael Kearney, licensed consultants.
And I'm Duncan Craig, and we're both here to represent the licence holder, well, the licence holder is a company, but Mr. Ali is here on behalf of the company. He is the DPS. You just want to say hello, Mr. Ali?
Yep, hello. Is that working?
So, Chair, did you want me to go through the report now?
Yes, please, Adrian. Yes, if you would. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So this is an application submitted by Lincolnshire Police for the review of a premises licence, and it relates to the Agra restaurant and takeaway, which is on Lawrence Street in Horncastle, and it's a premises that's been there for quite a while now, quite an established premises in Horncastle. So that, like I say, the application for review has been submitted by Lincolnshire Police Chair, and it relates to a police and immigration enforcement operation that took place at the premises earlier on this year. Now, I'm not going to go through the police's application for review, Chair. I think probably it's appropriate that they go through that and set out the circumstances, what led to their decision to call the licence in for review. But I think primarily for Mr. Ali, it's probably best if I go through the options that the licensing committee have and just explain a bit of the process, if that's okay. So, Mr. Ali, this is an application for a review of the premises licence that's held by the Agra Horncastle Limited, and the subcommittee have got a range of decisions that they can make. And just so you're aware, I'll go through that range of decisions. Of course, you've had this report in advance, so you've had a chance to read that, but I'll summarise everything as we go through. So, the subcommittee can leave your licence as it is. They don't have to change that licence. If Lincolnshire Police don't persuade the licensing subcommittee, the councillors, that there's need for change, then the licence will stay as it is. But the changes that the committee can make, they can modify the conditions on the licence. So they could change the wording on conditions, they could add conditions to the licence. They can do quite a lot of things in relation to the conditions on the licence if they think it's appropriate to do so. They could take a licensable activity off the licence if they think that's appropriate. They could remove the designated premises supervisor if they don't think that person is appropriate for the role, is not fulfilling the role in the way that they expect them to. And I think, Mr. Ali, you're the designated premises supervisor, aren't you? I think if you just nod, that's fine. Yeah, okay. They can decide to suspend the license if they think it's appropriate, but the maximum period that they can suspend for is 3 months. So maximum's 3 months. They could suspend for a lesser period if they thought it was appropriate. And the final step they could do is they could revoke the license. Now, the advice that I always give to the committee in my reports is they should look at the lesser steps first, and they should only move to that final step, revocation of the license, if they think none of the other, what I'm going to call lesser steps, are going to achieve the licensing objectives. So my advice to them in my reports is they should first of all look at what I'm going to call, like I called the lesser steps, and they shouldn't move to revocation if they think the other steps are not appropriate. Of course, if they leave their license as it is and decide to not make any change, they could issue you with a warning in relation to future conduct. So that's one of the other options that they could take on board. So, Chair, the license itself is held by Agra Horncastle Limited, which is a company, and the designated premises supervisor is Mr. Ali, he's just confirmed that for you. So you have a duty to consider the review submitted by Lincolnshire Police, and Lincolnshire Police in their application for review have said that they feel that the review relates to the prevention of crime and disorder and the public safety licensing objectives. So I'll let the police go through that for you in a moment. What I would say to you is the application for review was advertised on the council's website for a period of 28 days, and also there was the normal blue notice that went outside the premises as well. It was copied to all the responsible authorities, so that's Lincolnshire Trading Standards, Health and Safety and such like. None of those responsible authorities made submissions. So none of the other authorities jumped on board of this application for review and felt that they needed to have something to say. No members of the public got involved. They had 28 days to make written submissions if they felt they had views about the premises that related to the licensing objectives, and they wanted you to be aware of those. So the advertising of the review didn't result in any responses in relation to the premises license review. What I've done in the report, I've cut and pasted and set out for you relevant areas of your licensing policy and the statutory guidance from the Home Office under 182 of the Licensing Act. That's in the report for you, Chair. And I'm sure Lincolnshire Police and probably the licence holders' representatives are going to perhaps focus on certain areas of that guidance as we go through the process. What I've also done in the report, I've given you a copy or an extract from a copy for the premises licence, and that is set out in one of the appendices to the report. It's on my page 21, Chair, of the report pack, and that sets out the licence hours and also sets out the licence conditions in relation to the premises. You have the actual application for review submitted by the police, Chair, and that starts on page 13 of the report. I think probably, Chair, that's all I probably need to say, apart from just probably pointing out a bit more of procedure. So for everybody that's in this meeting, because it's the police's application for review, the Chair will normally invite Lincolnshire Police to make their case first. And then at the end, when everybody gets an opportunity for summing up, it will be the premises licence holders' representatives that do the final summing up. It's it's Mr. Ali or Mr. Ali's company's licence that's being called for review. So we feel it's appropriate that they get the opportunity at the end, let's say, to have the final summing up. But normally, Chair, like we've done before, it's the police do their submission first. So I'll pop back to yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Twitty, for that. That's great. Thank you. So if I could call on Sergeant Enderby, please, to put the case forward for the police, please.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
I'll outline to the committee the circumstances that have led to Lincolnshire Police asking for this review, the review of the premises licence. It was on the 22nd of January this year, 2020, that police and immigration officers visited the premises. I think it's important to point out at this stage that this wasn't a fishing trip. This was a pre-planned operation where immigration officers had specific intelligence that related to illegal workers being employed at this venue in Horncastle. The trip had been planned between ourselves and immigration officers for 3 weeks prior to the 22nd, and the intelligence that immigration held on their systems had obviously been on the systems prior to that. So you're talking at least a month to 6 weeks. They had this information in relation to this premises employing illegal workers. When we attended at the premises, it was open and it was trading to the members of the public. There were 5 members of staff on all in the premises. We did the usual procedures where the staff are checked, they are spoken to by the immigration officers, and one of these members of staff who had been located in the kitchen working was found to be illegally working. Due to his current immigration status in the United Kingdom, he was barred from any form of employment. Initially, I think it's fair to say attempts were made by both the worker, the other persons present, and the designated premises supervisor, Mr. Ali, to claim the male was not working. However, as our visit progressed, you will see from the information in Appendix A that they did eventually concede that he was working at the premises. It's standard procedure for immigration officers to interview all the members of staff present. At Appendix A, you have the interview with both the designated premises supervisor, Mr. Ali, and the worker himself. Now, the terminology that may be used there in relation to helping out, etc., is clearly the male was working. I'm not going to go through that in forensic detail. I'm sure the committee has had the opportunity to read that, but clearly with both those interviews, the male was paid cash in hand. He wasn't given a wage slip. He was employed off the books, as it were. No PAYE, no national insurance contribution. It appeared he was allowed to live above the premises, and he didn't have to pay rent for that. That was part of him working at the premises, and he was given food. So I suppose he was provided food and board and some cash for working at the premises. And crucially, no one connected to the premises appeared to have done the simple checks required in law of any employer to check that a worker of any nationality is actually legally entitled to work. Both Mr. Ali and the worker claimed he'd only been working for 2 weeks at the premises, but as there were no check of his documents, no copies made or records retained, no wage slips, nothing that we could check to verify that, we have really no idea how long that male had been working at that premises. Certainly there's no documentation to indicate when he was first employed and how long for. I don't think there is any dispute that this male, a legal worker who is barred for employment, was encountered working at these premises. I don't believe the DPS or his legal representative is going to dispute the fact that that was what we encountered on the night that we visited the premises in January. The business has been served with a civil penalty notice by the Home Office Immigration Department for £10,000. That was served to the premises on the 12th of March 2020 for the illegal employment of a worker. The premises, as part of the process of serving a civil penalty notice on any business or employer, there is a process they can go through where they can object to that civil penalty notice. They can say that they have evidence that proves that they haven't committed the offence, and they also have a chance to appeal the issuing of that civil penalty notice. I have spoken to the Home Office immigration officers, and no objection or appeal was made against the civil penalty notice. That period has now expired. The premises had their opportunity to dispute the findings of the Home Office when they served the penalty notice on them. They've chosen not to do that. There is now an outstanding fine on the business of £10,000 for employing an illegal worker. Again, I don't think there can be any dispute that what we found when we visited the premises does undermine the licensing objective of the prevention of crime. It is a criminal offence under Section 21 of the Immigration, Asylum and Nationality Act 2006 to employ a person who is disqualified from employment. Section 1127 of the Section 182 guidance to the Licensing Act also states that there is certain criminal activity that may arise in connection with licensed premises which should be treated particularly seriously. One of those activities that is listed is for employing a person who is disqualified from that work by reason of their immigration status in the United Kingdom. At Section 1128 of the guidance, it also states that where reviews arise and the licensing authority determines that the crime prevention objective is being undermined through the premises being used to further such crimes, it is expected that revocation of the licence, even in the first instance, should be seriously considered. The ability to work illegally is the key driver in illegal migration. The restaurant and licensed trade as a whole are recognised throughout the country and the county as high risk areas in relation to illegal employment. Indeed, the Licensing Act was changed to identify the risk further and give powers to immigration officers. Illegal employment leaves people vulnerable to exploitation and results in unscrupulous employers undercutting compliant businesses. It can also negatively inflect on the wages of lawful workers and is linked to other labour market abuse, such as tax evasion, breach of the national minimum wage, and exploitive working conditions for the workers. It is clearly not a victimless crime, and had this premises implemented the most basics of checks, the situation that we found when we visited in January could have been easily prevented. But the facts remain that nobody at this premises appears to have done what they were legally obliged to do at the time. It wasn't a mistake, it wasn't an oversight, they just didn't do the checks in relation to this male that every employer has to do by law. So they've broken the law. I have seen the evidence presented on behalf of the premises, but obviously no narrative comes with it. I don't know the explanation that's going to be presented with the paperwork that has been presented as evidence. But what does appear to be missing from that is obviously the explanation as to why this male was employed. And I'm sure Mr. Craig, Mr. Kang and Mr. Ali will hopefully explain to the committee the circumstances around how this male came to be working at the premises. From the paperwork I have seen, which has been submitted, the right to work checks, they appear to be to illustrate that right to work checks have been done on some of the workers. For my understanding of it, I have concerns in relation to that paperwork because they appear to indicate that the premises probably did know what they should be doing and that they did understand their lawful responsibilities, because clearly they appear to have done it for some of the workers. The dates of the checks that have been presented are dated 2007, which appears to demonstrate in 2017 rather, they knew what to do, which makes it even harder to explain the failure to do the checks for the worker we encountered. Wage slips, tax forms may be presented as proof of the business's legitimacy, but we know the illegal worker, all illegal workers are employed off the books and hidden. So these documents don't prove anything that we don't already know. They just show that yes, the premises do employ some workers legitimately, but they cannot be used to persuade the committee that they don't employ illegal workers, because they won't have any documentation for illegal workers, as we found when we visited. The list of conditions that have been submitted by the premises are also robust and useful tools that can be used in managing a licensed premises, but they are only as good as the people implementing them. This premises has already demonstrated that they pick and choose what laws and legislation they follow. The committee has to have confidence that those conditions will be adhered to, that by putting more onerous conditions on the licence, the designated premises supervisor, the people charged with managing this premises are actually capable of adhering to those conditions. Guidance to the Licensing Act states conditions should not replace or should not replicate existing laws or legislation. I've been at numerous hearings and Mr. Keng has argued that very point. Yet a condition is suggested that replicates something that all employers have to do by law, and which these premises have already demonstrated that they chose to ignore. The guidance is clear enough. Revocation should be seriously considered, even on the first occasion. If the licence holders can demonstrate to the committee why the circumstances were as ourselves and immigration officers found them, if they can offer compelling mitigation, then clearly other sanctions could be appropriate and should be considered. Removal of the DPS, put somebody in charge who is better, additional conditions on the licence. But if they fail to fully explain the circumstances, if there is no real explanation as to how an illegal worker came to be employed there, then Lincolnshire Police believe that the committee should follow the guidance. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that, Sergeant Enderby. Mr. Twiddy, I see you've got a blue hand up. You would like to question, I think.
It's not a question, Chair. I just wanted to make Sergeant Enderby clear about something, and probably everybody else that's involved in this process. So, Sergeant Enderby, you didn't ask for any of your submissions to be in private session. Are you okay? Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm happy. We haven't presented any information that needs to be in private session.
Yeah. What I was going to mention was, of course, as we move on, the licence holders' representatives have submitted evidence that includes proof of right to work in the UK. So that will be things like passports and national insurance numbers and things like that. So if everybody's just aware, Chair, if we need to go into private session, or if they're about to present something that they think ought to be in private session, they need to make you aware of that. But at the moment, Chair, nobody's asked for any part of this hearing to be considered to be in private session. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mr. Twiddy. Has either of the councillors got any questions for Sergeant Enderby? No. Yes, I've got Councillor Leonard first, and I'll have Mr. Duncan Craig afterwards. Mr. Councillor Leonard, yes, you've got a question.
Yes, can we just clarify with the officer the status that they found of the gentleman in question, as in his ability to work or not work, and what was the obviously the outcome was the fine, but can we just clarify, please, for the record, the actual status of his working position in this country?
At the time of the visit in January, due to his immigration status, he was barred from any form of employment. So if any checks had been made, or if the correct checks had been made in relation to him, they would have found that he was barred from any employment. I think previously he had been allowed to work in the United Kingdom, but those rights have been withdrawn. And this is something that happens quite regularly, obviously, that people will come on visas, the visas will expire, or they will come into the country, they will seek asylum or similar, and they may be given a right to work, but that will be time limited. And obviously that's the reason why you should always check people, because somebody may have had the right to work, and that right to work may have been pulled back, as it were.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor. Yeah, Mr. Duncan Craig, please, if you've got a question, I think.
Mr. Craig, you're muted again.
Could you take your blue hand down, Councillor?
There we go.
Enderby?
I'll ask the question again. I do apologise, everybody. Sergeant Enderby, just are you aware of a similar visit to the premises in 2011? Is that something you're aware of? You're on mute, Sergeant Enderby. Sergeant Enderby's, you're on mute.
Yes, I'm aware that previous immigration visits have taken place. 2011 was before my time in the licensing department, so I can't fully comment on the circumstances of it.
But presumably, if there'd been anything untoward, then you would be aware of that.
Not always, no, because in 2011, how we dealt with, or how Lincolnshire Police and indeed the Immigration Service dealt with immigration offenders on licensed premises has changed considerably in those 9 years. Sometimes.
Okay, but there's certainly nothing in your knowledge of anything untoward that arose from any of those visits.
Not in my knowledge, no.
Great, well, thank you. That's it, Chair. Thank you.
Has anyone else? Has any of the Councillor Brooks, have you got any questions? No. Okay. Has Mr. Kane got anything you would like to ask Sergeant Enderby, or?
Yeah, no, thank you.
Not, thank you, Mr. Kane. If not, then we'll move on to Mr. Ali and Mr. King and Mr. Craig to put the case forward for Mr. Ali. Thank you, Mr. King.
Chair, it'll be me that's making the oral representations on behalf of the licence holder.
Okay,
obviously, you may have questions for a particular Mr. Ali, and I'm sure if Mr. Keng feels he needs to get involved, I certainly don't have a problem with that at all. So, but certainly the thrust of the licence holder's representations will be made by myself. I'll just give you, if I may, a little bit of a background. This is a family owned and operated business. They've had the business, in fact, since 2005. Mr. Ali is part of that family. He is company secretary of the licence holding company, which is Agra Horncastle Limited. And he has, in fact, he has been the general manager. He's 28 years of age. He's been the general manager for 4 years, since 2016, and became the designated premises supervisor in February 2017. So it's right to say that he's been actively involved in the operation of the business for a considerable period. The visit on the 22nd of the 1st, just to be clear, he wasn't working that evening, but he lives in Horncastle, and so he went down to the premises. And I think he made himself available very quickly. But at the time that the visit took place, he wasn't present on site. It was a Wednesday night. He was having the night off. So I'll just give a little bit of background to his involvement in relation to the particular evening. Now, I'll deal with the evening, in fact, first. And in fact, the employment of this particular worker. You've all hopefully received the supporting documents. There was a 32-page document. Have you got that, Chair? 32-page document that was sent last week.
Yes, we've got all the information that's been forwarded to us, yes.
Very well. And then in addition, and I apologise for it being over the weekend, but it only came into my possession very late on Friday, but there's also a P45, and I'll explain all of that to you now. I think that's an appropriate time to do that. I know as a licensing authority, you deal with a number of issues around people who either aren't entitled to work in the UK or are even entitled to be here. And that does encompass a very wide range of behaviour and circumstances. And clearly, there are, you will be familiar with instances where the entire workforce or virtually the entire workforce are there by virtue of the fact that they shouldn't be, either by the fact they shouldn't even be in the UK or they're not entitled to work. And I've served this evidence and I have to take issue with what Sergeant Enderby said, but I'll, in respect of how this business is operated and the lawful way it broadly runs its operation, because this is an established business. You can see from the first page that it was registered for VAT in 2003. And turning to the second page in the bundle that I've provided, you can see there, and clearly we're in an unusual situation at the moment. The business hasn't traded for some time, like any licensed business over the course of the last few months. But you can see there on the second page, this is from around the period when the visit took place, just about 5 days before, in fact. You can see a list of all the employees there. So what that demonstrates is a couple of things. First of all, that the employees go through the PAYA scheme. I don't know why I struggled with that then. And so the business operates legitimately on that basis. But it's also hopefully demonstrates to you that all of these employees are entitled to be and work in the United Kingdom. They have contracts of employment. And I think it's also right to say, and it's worthwhile making the point, you can see there's a few there that all have the same surname. This is a family business, and perhaps to some extent that may have informed well, I suppose the culture within the organisation more generally. But you can see from the documents that have been supplied that those employees are both paying tax, are being employed in a legitimate fashion, and moreover are entitled to be employed. The only one who doesn't have an employment contract is Mr. Ali himself, just by virtue of the fact that it's effectively his business, and so that would be a bit of a nonsense. And so on that basis, he's simply provided his passport details. Could then ask you to turn to page 30 in the supplemental documents that I provided. And this here is a wage slip for the individual in question. Now, the reason why that is relevant, and I would submit it's hugely relevant to your deliberations, is that this gentleman was employed previously. Sergeant Enderby is correct. He was previously entitled to work in the UK. Clearly, this isn't a position in any event where this is somebody who's not entitled to be in the United Kingdom, but the Sergeant Enderby's pointed out their entitlement to work has expired. This gentleman was employed, and I have the dates, from the 6th of November 2017 to the 8th of August 2018. And at that time, a check was undertaken on this individual, and following that, he was employed, and he was employed for that period. And that's why I've served, in addition to that, today, his P45 to demonstrate to you that his employment hasn't been continuous in the intervening period, and he left the employment. I understand, and you can see from that P45, the leaving date is confirmed as the 8th of August 2018. That's in box 4 on the further supplemental document that I've served today. The situation was that I understand this gentleman continued to live in Horncastle. He was employed by the chef in the kitchen. If I could invite you just to turn back to page 2. He is Tabaris Ali. Mr. Askir Ali will correct me if I'm wrong on that, but he's Mr. Tabaris Ali. He is So a little bit of further background. The business was originally opened by Mr. Ali's father, and Mr. Ali's father died in 2008. Mr. Ali himself was down in Croydon at the time. I understand he was studying down there, and he eventually came back to run the business. Mr. Tabaris Ali is his father's brother, so it's his uncle, and he is generally involved in the employment of staff. And this particular individual, that is to say, Mr. Ansar Ahmed, the gentleman in question, was re-employed by Tabaris Ali. I understand that in the first week of January. It's right to say, I'll turn to the employment issue now. Actually, why don't I deal with it now? We're all experienced in dealing with what constitutes employment and what doesn't constitute employment. We have to understand what that is in order to evaluate, for me to be able to advise people and for you to make an informed decision as to an appropriate step under the Licensing Act. So Mr. Ali is sat at home. He's all of a sudden told that there are officers down at the restaurant. He goes down and he's bombarded with a series of questions. He's not legally represented. They also make the point that the interview, such as it was, wouldn't have been recorded, and so the transcript, although Mr. Ali accepts it broadly reflects what he said, I have to take issue with the fact that it's a totally accurate reflection of what was said. But his understanding of what being employed perhaps doesn't necessarily accord with the legal definition. From his point of view, the circumstances relating to Mr. Ansar's employment are as follows. He was continuing to live in Horncastle. He was having some problems at home with his wife. He approached Mr. Ali's uncle about getting some work in the kitchen. That is to say, Mr. Tabaris Ali. Mr. Tabaris Ali, having previously knew that he was entitled to work in the UK, agreed, first of all, that he could stay upstairs for a few days a week whilst his marital problems hopefully resolved themselves. And on occasions, and Mr. Ali has to accept that this was wrong and does accept this was wrong and a mistake on his part, but on occasions, this individual helped out in the kitchen when there were difficulties. His duties only extended to, as I understand it, pot washing duties. It was washing up and things along those lines. It was very much on an ad hoc basis. It was principally occurred at weekends. And so on that basis, having discussed the matter with Mr. Ali, it is conceded that in terms of what constitutes employment and what doesn't constitute employment, that an error was made and this gentleman did undertake some work. It's also right to say, and the police have taken issue with this, the manner in which he was employed perhaps isn't altogether the most appealing situation, but equally it's not a situation where somebody's being paid below minimum wage. It's clearly around, I think it was £10 an hour was the rate, and so accordingly on that basis, I would submit for all those reasons, this doesn't fall squarely into a type of premises which is simply ignoring the law carte blanche and operating in a way that doesn't in any way pay close attention to its legal responsibilities. This is a license that has been held by this family effectively through a company since 2005. There have been no reviews of the license. There have been no, as I understand it, no complaints in relation to how the licenses has been operated. There was a hearing, I note, from the license itself. If we just invite you, in fact, to turn to that, it's at page 21, the premises license. That's in the agenda report. Everybody got to that? Hope I'm not going too quickly.
21.
Yeah. And if you look, in fact, then if I could just invite you to look to Annex 3, which is at page 25. There is a condition that was attached to the premises following a hearing held on the 26th of September 2005, which you can tell it's 15 years ago. It makes reference to karaoke. Bit of a blast from the past there. So clearly there was some concern around that time. It's also right to say this. There are a few conditions around nuisance as well, which would suggest perhaps 15 years ago there were one or two issues around that, but clearly nothing since. No, otherwise there would have been further conditions that would have been imposed following a hearing. So it's right to say that is clear evidence that you have that this is a business that does operate itself in a responsible manner. I would further add to that I have to say, as robustly as I can, no question in my mind, if any of those previous visits had there was any suspicion of any issues around illegal workers, then I don't doubt for a second Lincolnshire Police would have A, discovered that, and B, utilise that information in respect of these review proceedings. So again, I would submit that significantly undermines the suggestion that these premises are cocking a snook at their legal responsibilities. In respect of the civil penalty notice, Sergeant Enderby, and it's right for me to acknowledge, I think we have a reasonably good working relationship. I hope he thinks the same. And certainly we were communicating last week because I didn't know whether there'd been a civil penalty notice imposed, and certainly based on my discussions with my client, he said that the last thing he received was a notice he was given on the date of the visit, and he was clear to me that he'd not received any notification of a civil penalty notice. And it was only following Sergeant Enderby informing me, I think it was on Friday, that there had been one imposed for £10,000, which I understand is 50% of the maximum. I conveyed that to Mr. Ali on Friday. He was genuinely flabbergasted. And the simple position is he has not received that notification. Now, that may well be, well, I can speak from personal experience. I've had absolute nightmares with the mail over the course of the last 3 months, stuff that hasn't turned up, stuff that's been ridiculously late. But also the registered address for the business is the premises, which of course have been closed during that period. So the position is that certainly in terms of the notice, because my client hasn't seen it, he wishes to keep his options open. I would say if he's out of time to appeal, there must be circumstances that cover non-service of the document, whether he can challenge that. I don't know whether he's going to seek to do that because he hasn't had sight of the documentation itself, but certainly that's something that he wishes to consider once he's in receipt of the notice itself. So Sergeant Enderby was correct in pointing out the fact that it hadn't been challenged because, well, it simply can't have been challenged because my client didn't receive and hasn't had the receipt of that notice. But of course, the notice is a separate issue. That isn't an overwhelmingly determining factor as to your evaluation today. Your decision today is based on appropriate steps for the promotion of the licensing objectives. And with that in mind, if I could just then invite you to turn to page 31 of my the bundle that I submitted. So what I am proposing at the very least, so and may I just say, extremely helpfully set out agenda, Mr. Twiddy. Best I've seen in a while, actually. And one of the things Mr. Twiddy suggested in there is the possibility that you may consider one or two conditions in relation to, they at the back, actually, I'll work backwards. So at page 33, suggested conditions 12 and 13 are those that were contained within the agenda report at page 6, in fact, of the agenda pack. I don't agree with Sergeant Enderby's analysis. I think that there are certain instances where a condition wholly duplicates a statutory requirement. This adds a little more to it. It gives a specified period for the retention, and so I would submit that this is a purposeful condition that can focus a license holder's mind, or they both are, in fact, conditions that can focus a license holder's mind, namely the right to work checks being mandated within the license, and that the documents are retained for a period of 12 months. Then turning back, if I may, to page 31. I won't, you'll be delighted to hear, Chair, I'm sure. I'm not going to read them out verbatim, but these are, and I'm very grateful for the indication from Sergeant Enderby. I did make a note that the robust and useful, there we go, it was the expression he used, that conditions can serve that purpose. These conditions here on this licence are focused on these particular type of premises. You already have a condition that subsists on the present licence about table service. It's conditions around CCTV, incident books, refusals register training. There's only one that relates to that relates to public nuisance, and that's because the licence is presently quite heavily conditioned in relation to public nuisance. And then lastly, I'm going about this in a slightly out of order, but there's a reason for that, challenge 25. And so asking, if I may, for you to turn back to page 25 in the agenda pack. I would just, so I'm not proposing that any of the existing conditions are removed from the licence, save for the protection of children from harm condition, because the challenge 25 condition that's suggested actually enhances that, and in actual fact that condition itself is clearly of some antiquity. The Portman Prove It card it isn't really of any currency anymore, and in actual fact that condition requiring a proof of age policy is required as a mandatory condition 9 under the premises license anyway, so it duplicates, I would suggest, a mandatory condition. So I would just propose on behalf of the license holder that you add all those conditions to the license. They are all proportionate and appropriate, targeted and enforceable, all the things that are required under 1.16 of the statutory section 182 guidance, and that you retain all the existing conditions on the license, save for that one under the heading protection of children from harm, for the reasons that I've outlined in my submissions. You do have a range of options, again helpfully set out by Mr. Twiddy at the outset of today's hearing. Clearly, removal of the DPS is one of those options. I'm not going to seek to persuade you one way or the other. That is an option for you. Clearly, irrespective, Mr. Ali would retain an interest in the business. It's a family business. I'm not going to seek to deviate from that. And if you are minded to impose a suspension, again, it's set out helpfully in the report. That is not something that should be in any way punitive. It should serve to act as a deterrent, both to these premises and other premises. But I would just add a layer to this, which I think is right to say on behalf of any license holder at the moment. You know, we've all lived through some extraordinary times in the last few months. something that none of us could have possibly conceived, and on New Year's Eve, some six months or so ago. And these premises are no different to that. They've been closed for 3 months, have suffered significant hardship as a consequence of that. And so I would just invite you. It doesn't mean that that's an overwhelming point, because you're here to promote the licensing objectives and take steps that are appropriate to that end. But I would just...
Excuse me, so sorry, Mr. Craig. Could I just make the chairman aware that Councillor Leonard, I believe, has become disconnected. I've lost him off the screen. I just think he's dropped out of the meeting again. Oh, he may be coming back in.
I hope that wasn't.
Sorry.
I hope that wasn't 20 minutes ago. I'm not going to say all this again.
No, it was literally 1 second ago. I was just waiting for you to finish your sentence, really. I'll just admit him back in. Councillor Leonard is back in, thank you.
Yeah, he just went off, didn't he, Anne? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry.
Thank you.
Councillor Leonard, may I ask where you're up to when
That's a very good question. I'm not sure the bit I've got the gist of it, because I've read all the notes anyway, so don't panic about it. But
okay,
yeah.
Very well.
Yeah.
So I would just invite you all, 3 of you, please, to consider that as part of the. I was just say, Councillor Leonard, about the hardship that all businesses have had to suffer lately, and just simply, I think it's right to make that point on behalf of any license holder. So, and again, Sergeant Enderby did make the point about 11.28 about the fact that the government guidance says you should seriously consider revocation. Well, of course you should seriously consider revocation. You should seriously consider every option that's available to you in the course of this hearing. And I'm encouraged by the fact that you are guided, as it were, to consider the lesser steps first. And with that in mind, I would invite you just to consider 11.20 in the guidance, which interestingly appears to be missing from the police representations, which should take that you should take no more steps than are appropriate for the promotion of the licensing objectives. And what we're talking about here is an established business that has run and served a purpose for the local community for a long time. The loss of the license will almost certainly make the business unviable. That's certainly what my client feels. I would just invite you to just consider the context of how long this business has operated, that the fact it does employ people in a legitimate fashion, and that it's re-employed somebody on the assumption, an incorrect assumption, that they were still entitled to work in the country, and have fallen short. But it simply cannot follow that every instance of a company or of a business falling short means that it's a revocation of the license irrespective. That simply cannot be right, because like any type of human behavior, it can encompass a wide range of features. And I would submit, for all the reasons that I've outlined, this clearly falls towards the bottom of such behavior. And in such instance, revocation and taking the business away of a business that's been established for this long cannot be appropriate and cannot be proportionate in the circumstances, because otherwise other businesses will say, well, I may as well be hung for a sheep as well as a lamb. That they clearly here are employing people who are entitled to be in the country and paying their way by the tax system of the UK. And there are many, many businesses within this sector who simply don't engage with the tax system at all, don't register for that, don't put any of the staff through the PAYE, don't undertake any checks at all. Well, I would submit this is not a business that shares those characteristics. This is a business that has made a mistake, has screwed up. I think that's right to say, but that doesn't mean that in this instance, revocation of their license is an appropriate step. So for those reasons, I would invite you to add those conditions to the license remove that one single condition for the reasons I've outlined, just to tie the licence up, and take whatever other steps you deem to be appropriate. And if that is a suspension, for that to be as short a period as you deem to be appropriate against the backdrop of the previous good conduct of these premises. And so I'm just checking my notes now, but I believe that that's me. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Craig. Thank you. I've got Mr. Twiddy would like a question, I think.
It's not a question, Chair. It's I just wanted to clarify something, but I don't know if you want to go to Kim.
Whichever, Adrian, thank you.
Do you want to go to Kim, your legal advisor, first, just in case she's got something more important, let's say, than I have? Would you like to, Kim? I think you've got something you would like to say, please.
Yeah, Chairman, I just wanted to just double check with Councillor Leonard what you did miss. Did you hear the part about the conditions on pages 31 onwards, and the conditions that Duncan Craig said should be substituted and shouldn't? Did you catch that part?
I probably didn't catch all of that, no.
Right. Do you recall the last thing you remember?
I think I know you were running through the notes and the documentation, and that was as far as, can't remember the exact one. I was preoccupied by my loss of connection.
Would you like me to repeat that part again? Because it is quite important.
I think if you could, it would be helpful then. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
I went about it a little bit back to front, but there was a reason for that. If you could ask you to turn to page 33 within the bundle that I've forwarded last week, in fact. Have you got that?
I'll let you do a quick resume if you like.
Yeah, that's fine. So 33, there are two conditions there, 12 and 13, proposed conditions, I might add, which deal with right to work. They were contained within the agenda report at page 6. So effectively, not effectively, I've copied and pasted those. I've agreed those with my client, so he's perfectly content for those to go on. Sergeant Enderby doesn't believe that it's appropriate that conditions like that go on a license, because the section 182 guidance says you shouldn't duplicate other statutory requirements. I don't agree with that analysis, and these are typical of conditions which I frequently add to licenses. So I don't agree with that. That's a professional difference that he and I have. You'll take legal advice on that, I'm sure. And then I've then suggested a number of conditions which you'll have read, of course, around. I won't read them all out. Don't worry, you'll be grateful to hear. CCTV, incident book, refusals register, training. Then jumping on a little, public nuisance, I've only added one because the present license is quite heavily conditioned in relation to public nuisance, which is contained at page 25 in the agenda pack. And then lastly, I've suggested a challenge 25 condition, or two, in fact, one relating to notices, the other in terms of the operation of the challenge 25 scheme. And so turning back to the conditions that subsist on the current license, I would invite you to delete the one under the protection of children from harm at page 25, because that is now superfluous because of the challenge 25 condition. But I also believe it does duplicate mandatory condition number 9, which is contained on every premises license. So it's for reasons of duplication and superfluousness, if that's the correct word, then I would just invite you to delete that, but all the other conditions that are on the license to remain. So does that set out the position adequately? Okay, thank you.
Should do, thank you. Thank you for that, Duncan, that's great.
Okay.
Mr. Twiddy.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to clarify something in relation to licence conditions, because I think nobody's particularly mentioned this. I don't think Sergeant Enderby or Mr. Craig has mentioned it. If you go to page, let's have a look, page 32, of the report pack that officers have done. And then, so that's extracts from the statutory guidance, the Home Office guidance to the licensing authority. And on paragraph 10.8, imposed conditions, about 2/3 of the way down there, it does say, in order to promote the crime prevention licensing objective, conditions may be included that are aimed at preventing illegal working in licensed premises. So my view is the section 182 guidance does give you the power, if you're minded to use it, to put conditions on in relation to illegal workers.
Well, thank you for that, Mr. Twiddy. I must have missed that one, so thank you for that very much.
Okay, thank you.
We'll excuse that one. Thank you for that, Adrian.
And then if you want to go to page 25 of the report pack.
Yes.
Just going back to that licensing hearing in 2005, I thought, seeing as it's been mentioned, Chair, I'll just give you a flavour of it. I think Mr. Keng was in that as well. We both dealt with that licensing hearing. I think that would be fair to say in 2005, with the extension in licensing hours for entertainment and alcohol, that hearing was typical of a lot of the hearings I dealt with in 2005, where members of the public were concerned that the possible extension in hours would result in noise or difficulties for them as neighbours. So my records here don't indicate that it was a result of anything going wrong. It was the concerns of the local residents and the local businesses because of the extension of hours that happened in 2005 with all the premises in the district. So thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you for that, Mr. Twiddy. Councillor Billy Brooks, you've got a question, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've just got a few questions, actually. The first one is, obviously, Mr. Ali's been the DPS since 2017. So I was just really looking for clarification that he has carried out these right to work checks in the past and is familiar with how to do it.
Is that to Mr. Halley?
Whoever can answer it, really.
Certainly based on my discussions, yes, and clearly that happened with regards to this gentleman back in 2017, in fact. It's just the premises has fallen short, and that he acknowledges that.
Yeah, thank you. And my second question is, obviously I'm not too sure about, but when you do a check on someone, does it give the date of which they'll no longer have that right to work in the? So when the check was carried out on the person in question in 2017, they left in 2018. Will it have said on that somewhere that this person will no longer have a right to work after such and such a date?
Mr. Keng might be better placed to answer that than me.
I can answer it.
Yeah, please, if you could.
Yeah, do you want to go, Ken?
Yeah, I mean, my understanding is, obviously, if you get a documentation that's a visa and it says a date that the person is only allowed to work till a certain date, at that date, you do the checks again to ensure they've been given further right to work. If somebody leaves your employee, so stops working for you, whether it be for a week, a month or 2 years, when they start looking for employment again, you have to do a right to work check again, because obviously their circumstances could have changed. Yeah. So in 2018, the male stopped working for the premises. When he came back, whenever it was, because obviously we don't know when he did start working there, that was the point they should have checked again that he was still entitled to work.
Thanks a lot.
Can I just, and I hope I've made this clear, premises aren't trying to say that check shouldn't have taken place. It should, but there are just extenuating circumstances that go to explain that. But of course, there's no question that is part of any employee's responsibilities. But there is a background to it, which hopefully explains things satisfactorily to you.
Thank you for that. Mr. Kane, thank you.
Yeah, I've just checked my my records, and indeed, the application to grandfather the premises license over at the Agra was made at the end of June 2005. There was representations from neighbours that were concerned about the potential of noise, as in 2005 there was lots of concerns from residents at the time. So going by that timeline, the end of representations would have been the end of July. The hearing probably should have been by the end of August, but I think because we're into a brand new regime, that's why the hearing is stated on the licence there as being the 26th of September. Certainly if we applied at the end of June 2005, there'd be no way that that licence would have been granted and people would have presented a review of the licence. So it purely was, as Mr. Twiddy alluded to, residents that were just concerned about the transition from the old into the new.
You're absolutely right. I remember that because I sat on that committee. Lovely. That's anyone got? Oh, Councillor Leonard, you've got a question, please.
Yes, thank you. It's just to Mr. Craig, actually. I know, obviously, we discussed the 2005 amendments and so on, but then there was, Sergeant Enderby said there was an inspection in 2011, but were there any amendments? Obviously, Sergeant Enderby that's prior to his arrival, but were there any amendments to the licence in 2011 at all?
No, there wasn't. Sergeant Enderby?
Here we go. Sorry, I'm getting confused between mute and unmute. The position is that, and I'm sorry if I've not made that clear, Councillor Leonard. The visit in 2011 was an immigration enforcement visit to establish whether there were illegal immigrants there. And my understanding is from my client, and certainly Sergeant Enderby has nothing to contradict this, was that there were there was nothing untoward in respect of that. It wasn't directly related to the licence. So there would have been no action against the licence because it didn't relate to the licence at the time. And I think what Sergeant Enderby said as well, as in fairness to him, the way matters were dealt with back then. I think my first one was in Grantham, and I think that was 2013. So I think things started getting, the process was different around that time in 2011, because I guess all this legislation had only just come to the fore. So answer to your question is the visit in 2011 was simply a routine visit, as I understand, to check whether there were any illegal workers there, and there weren't. It did not relate to the licence at all.
Not related.
It's all in order, basically.
Thank you for that. No more questions from anyone? No? Okay, in that case, if I could ask Sergeant Enderby to sum up, please. Oh, sorry. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I've got some questions for the.
You just have to excuse me. I've got to get my charger.
So yeah, Sergeant Enderby, if you just want to give it a few minutes and then we'll be back.
I'm just going to, someone started using a pneumatic drill outside my, the front of my flat. So I'm just going to close the window. I'll be 1 minute, literally.
Hello, can you hear me on that? I've only took the thing off on charge this morning and the battery was going down on me. It doesn't usually, it usually lasts more than an hour. Can you all hear me?
Yes, that's fine.
Oh, good. Yeah, sorry about that, but I'm plugged in now, so I won't run out of power. Yes, I was asking Sergeant Enderby to sum up, if he would, please.
I've got some questions, Chair, if that's
Oh,
permitted
yes,
for Mr.
okay,
Ali.
yes, carry on, yes.
Mr. Ali, how long was the gentleman we encountered actually working at the premises?
I think, as I said before, it was around 2 weeks. 2 weeks.
And am I right in thinking Mr. Craig said that it was only certain times that he would work?
Hello. Yep. Sorry, what was the question?
What I think Mr. Craig sort of intimated that he only worked at certain times, that he was a pot washer and he only worked at certain times. Would that be correct?
Yeah.
So what's your understanding of the times that he did work?
To be honest, it was very part, if you know what I mean. Not continuous.
So when, I suppose what I'm getting to is when would you require him to work, or why would you require him?
There was no requirement. It was my uncle, would say to him, I don't know what conversation they have between them, so I can't comment on that. But it's very occasional, as I said.
Right. So what? Because
I think Sergeant Enderby, I think I said it was, and it maybe Mr. Ali doesn't know what this means, but I think I said it was on an ad hoc basis. It was as and when, I guess, they got slammed in the restaurant. They may have said he was upstairs. They may have said, "Can you just help out with the?" I think that's my understanding. Would that be a fair assessment, reflection, Mr. Ali?
Yeah, but as mentioned, it was I don't know what ad hoc means, but very less, not continuous. Just
ad hoc means as and when required. That's
yeah. Those, as I said, there's no requirement. So there's no requirement set by me that like the others employees. With my uncle, is a conversation between them. So when he was called. That was nothing to do with me. I didn't call him in, if you know what I mean. So it was just my uncle, basically what Craig, yeah.
I suppose what that gets to the heart of the point that I can't understand, that as Mr. Craig is pointing out, he's called upon when he's required. Our visit was on a Wednesday night, very early, about sort of 6:30, 7 o'clock. There were 4 other members of staff and another member of staff who arrived for work while we were there. So that doesn't really present as a business that's busy and requires him to be working, yet he was working. Could you comment on that at all?
That's not really a question, is it, Sergeant Enderby?
No.
Well, that's it, camouflage.
You're making comment now. It's not a question.
Well, no, you stated that your belief was he helped out when the premises was busy. I'd like him to comment on the fact that when we visited, the mail was working and the premises clearly wasn't made busy. So that totally contradicts the picture you're trying to portray. So has he got any comment on that?
Mr. Ali? Yeah.
Yeah, so as I said, I wasn't on the premises, so I don't know why he was there. Like, I wasn't on the premises at all. I was outside. So it's, I can't comment on that because I wasn't there at the time. And as I said, if it's the discussions between my uncle and that guy, then I when I got there, it clearly wasn't busy. I agree with you, but I wasn't there to see why you might have found him there, if you know what I mean. So I'm not understanding that question.
Right, thank you. Could you give us your understanding of your requirements of the right to work checks as an employer, what you should do, please?
So if we get a new employee, we would ask for the ID first. I'll fill in that form that if you've seen it, it's a contract. I'll discuss the hours and stuff like that with them. And then in regards to checking, I'll check their passport. So if it's I do ask for two forms of ID. So it'll be the passport and a driving license. If they have it, if they've got no driving license, then that's that. I'll just check on the passport. As for the national insurance number, I'll get that as well because I need that for the PYE.
Are you aware that a national insurance number isn't a proof of ID?
No, we don't need it. It's not, I'm not saying it's a proof of ID. I'm saying additionally we need it for the, but that's okay. Let's put that aside. If we're not going to use that, the IDs I would request for is the driving license, a permit card, or a passport.
Sergeant Andy, it was clear from his answer that the national insurance number was in addition to the passport or work permit. It was clear from his answer that was his understanding.
And then, Mr. Ali, what would you then do? What is the process you would go through, please?
Sorry?
What is the process you would go through? So you've explained you'd ask to see certain documents, then what is the rest of the process you would go through?
So I would fill in that form, and if I've got any suspicion, I've got there's a online thing that you can check, or a telephone number you can call to check if that person's allowed to stay or whatever, if they're allowed to work or they got permit or whatever. But if they've got a British passport, usually I photocopy that and keep all the documents as backup. And that's that. But if it's like a permit one, I would phone the line and then I'll check. But obviously, we haven't had many change of staff throughout the years, so therefore, it's only we've done that in back in 2017.
Right. Did you, the gentleman?
Chair, this is descended into cross-examination now.
Thank you. Yes, I thank you for that. Yeah, I think we've got the gist of actually what we know that he was working there, and we understand we've been through the how it should be and the questions it should have asked. We've got that in the pack. So unless you've got no further real questions, Sergeant Enderby, I would like you to sum up, please.
Certainly, Chair. I mean, I don't believe I'm cross-examining, but I'll cover the points I was hoping to draw out of Mr. Ali in my summation. Thank you, Chair. These premises didn't do the lawful checks that they were required to do of this worker. Ignorance of the law isn't a defence as an employer. As a licence holder, it is their responsibility, and they failed. If this worker was employed legitimately between 2007 and 2018, and those checks of the gentleman were done correctly, the legislation points out that any employer should then keep the record of those checks for 2 years. I'm disappointed that Mr. Ali hasn't produced those documents, because they obviously should still be in his possession to prove he checked the worker the first time. And also the additional conditions that are presented, they state that the records will only be retained for a year, where they have to be retained for 2 years. I have concerns that Mr. Ali is attempting to downplay the employment of this worker. There clearly weren't circumstances beyond his control. He just didn't do what he should have done when he should have done it. There's no mistake, no misunderstanding. The licensing process is there to deal directly with concerns of criminality which are undermining the licensing objectives. As we've both said, any decision made by the subcommittee should be appropriate and proportionate response to the evidence that's been placed before it. We are guided, as we've already mentioned, by the 182 guidance, which states that even in the first instance, revocation should be seriously considered for employing a person under circumstances exactly as we have found at this premises. I believe that that should be considered the starting point. You should only move away from that position if you think this premises has provided mitigation that explains the situation, that puts the circumstances beyond their control, or the circumstances are such that they attempted to do what they should have done, they tried to do what they should have done, but for whatever reasons they failed. This isn't the case with these circumstances. With this premises, they just didn't do the checks. They just employed the person. I have concerns that even now they are still referring to the male as helping out, where he clearly wasn't helping out. He was working at the premises. So I have concerns that I don't really think that strong mitigating circumstances exist in this case. They have now clearly tried to rectify things to demonstrate compliance with the law and with licensing legislation, but it shouldn't take the intervention of two government agencies and a review hearing to make them do something that they should have been doing all along. It's about having confidence that moving forward, the right things are in place and the right people are in place to ensure that we don't encounter this situation again. Alongside that, the employment of illegal workers is a very serious problem in this county. It is a very serious problem in the whole country. It exploits vulnerable people and it gives the business unfair advantage against other legitimate businesses that are doing the right checks, which are paying a fair wage. This business profits from not employing people on the books. I will accept that clearly they do have persons who are employed legitimately, but they also had the worker who was employed illegally. The decision of the licensing committee cannot be a punishment. The legislation makes that very clear, but the decision of the committee can be used as a deterrent. It is time for the committee to send out a clear deterrent message so we can get on top of the situation of illegal employment in this county, to send a clear deterrent message that it's unacceptable and irresponsible to operate licensed premises with any illegal workers, whether it's one illegal worker or whether it's 7 illegal workers. That by employing illegal workers, that by not doing the lawful required checks, that you will face the ultimate sanction. So I believe revocation of the licence isn't appropriate, it is proportionate, and it is in the absolute interest of the wider community. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Sergeant Enderby. I'd now ask Mr. Craig if he would like to sum up for Mr. Ali, please.
Yes, Chair, thank you. I have to take issue with some of the terminology that Sergeant Enderby's used. He's used terms like profits. He previously used terms like workers. What we're talking about here is and that's all the evidence we have before us is in respect of one employee against the background and the context of a business that clearly operates in a lawful fashion. And what he's actually saying to you is, well, even in a business that does undertake checks and do all the necessary checks, employs people through the books, and is registered for VAT and has operated since 2005 without any problems. Well, if they screw up once, take the license off them anyway. Well, how is that in any way proportionate or appropriate step to take, particularly given where we find ourselves at the moment when businesses need all the support that they can get. The checks were undertaken, and in actual fact, the employee commenced his employment on the 6th of November. So that was more than 2 years before the visit on the 22nd of January of this year. So the maths, in actual fact, Sergeant Enderby is incorrect in respect of that. But I don't want to dwell too much on Sergeant Enderby's submissions. I would rather end on a more positive note. This is a business that's been there for 15 years, run by the same family. They acknowledge that they've fallen short, but falling short should not mean that the business just disappears and goes. They've spent the last 3 months closed and complied with their obligations in relation to government guidance for the last 3 months. And they're simply looking at moving forward and hopefully providing and continuing to provide a service to the wider community, which frankly people desperately need at the moment. They want to be able to go out and enjoy themselves after being locked away for the last 3 months. I've suggested a number of conditions. No issue's been taken by Lincolnshire Police in relation to those conditions in terms of their. Obviously, there is one issue around the conditions that Mr. Twiddy suggested, but I'm with Mr. Twiddy on this. They are appropriate and proportionate conditions, and on that basis, I would invite you to add those conditions, remove the condition I've suggested, and if you wish to suspend the license, you think you need to set a marker out, well, I would just invite you to do so for such a period as you deem isn't serving as a punishment to the premises, given all that I've set out. The guidance says you should seriously consider revocation, but I know you'll seriously consider all the options that are available to you today. And I would just invite you, against the backdrop of all I've provided, where we find ourselves today, the proportionality that you need to apply to this, and the context of this is one mistake that these premises have made, not an ongoing series of mistakes. And against that backdrop, I would just invite you to follow the course of action that I've suggested. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mr. Duncan. Kim, you've got a question for someone, I believe, or clarification?
Chairman, not a question. It was just in relation to the retention of documents. Just quickly pulling up the Home Office guidance. It's clear from there that the documents should be kept for the duration of a person's employment and a further 2 years after they stop working. So I think that's where the 2 years have come from.
Very well.
The gentleman stopped working in 2018 in August, so it would be 2020 this year.
Very well, thank you.
That was all, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Kim. Thank you. Lovely. So if that's a summing up from both, I will ask Anne now if you can just put you all in the waiting room, please, whilst the committee decide they have a discussion on this, please. And if you'd like to put them all in the waiting room, please, and then we'll call. Oh, sorry, I've got Mr. Twiddy, actually.
Okay.
I see Adrian's just come up.
Yeah, Chair, do you want just to remind everybody that you're not going to put them in the waiting room all day, that it will be,
no. Yes.
Yeah, just in case you've got any questions. Yeah.
Okay, yes, yeah, no, we're only just going to ask them to go into the waiting room to see if our councillors have any questions or anything when we get going. We won't keep you there all day, I do promise. So, and if you could put them in the waiting room for a few moments, please, and then we'll call you back. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll just do that now. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne.
Chairman, they're all in the waiting room now. If you just bear with me a moment, I'll pause the live recording as well on YouTube at this point and stop recording.
Yes, please. Sorry,
Adrian and Jonathan also need to go into the waiting room.
Right, thank you.
John Challen needs to go in as well, Anne, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. But I'll just pause on the live streaming, Chairman, and I'll confirm when it's paused.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's paused, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, as our councillors, Councillor Leonard or Councillor Brooks, is there any questions you would like to ask them before we let them go, please? Or any clarifications you
Nothing
need?
for me, thank you.
Thank you.
No, I think yeah, I think we got the gist of it. Yeah,
Everything's okay.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay, lovely. Thank you for that.
Chairman, just
Sorry, Kim.